Welcome to the podcast Artificial Art. My name is Steinar Jeffs. I'm a musician and a music teacher, and in this podcast I'll be interviewing guests about technology and creativity. So hi and welcome, Ezra Sandzer-Bell. I hope that's a decent enough pronunciation. I don't actually know how you say it.
You did a great job.
Thanks. I'll do a short introduction of you. So Ezra Sandzer-Bell is a musician, educator, and founder of AudioCipher, a plugin that turns words into MIDI melodies. And you started out writing books about cryptographic music theory and went on to teach producers music theory through interactive tools like hook theory. And today you write the widely read articles about AI and music, consult startups, and develop new tools that explore the creative potential of generative tech. Does that sound about right?
That sounds right. Yeah, you did your homework.
Great. And I was thinking it would be nice to hear a bit about your journey as a start. So how did you start doing music, and how did you end up going more into the tech side of things?
Yeah. Well, my family, everybody on both sides is a musician. So my dad plays piano, my mom plays flute. I grew up trained on cello, but I grew up listening to my dad play piano, and even my mother's father, my grandfather, was married to a woman who was a classical pianist who would play Debussy and Chopin. And so I grew up with kind of more of a classical and jazz influence. Like my parents weren't that into rock and roll. So when I was like a teenager, I started getting more into rock music. I went from playing cello in the school symphony orchestra to playing bass guitar and then eventually guitar. When I was in high school, I played in a math rock band. Math rock is kind of like, you could say like a polyrhythmic or odd time signature oriented style of progressive rock, kind of emerged out of the Midwest in the early 2000s, maybe even you could say like late 90s. And so that was kind of like where I got my start as a musician. I put out a couple of records with that band, and we toured and created a name for ourselves. That band is still selling records and still drives some monthly Spotify revenue, which is cool. And so yeah, I kind of had like my first aha moment as just a creator there, because rather than just like playing other people's music in orchestra, I was getting together with a couple of guys a few times a week and practicing a lot at home and creating something from scratch. And so it's like the entrepreneurial spirit of the DIY punk scene kind of, mixed with more of my like classical roots. Eventually in my early 20s, as that band started to fizzle out, I went back to college and did 4 semesters of music theory and got like my more fundamentals under my belt. And as I was going through that process, I kind of hit this wall where a lot of my innate creativity was starting to get stifled by sort of, I guess, ideas about music. Like the way that they take you through university programs. You're interviewing me from a university, so I'm sure you have some exposure to this. It's very much oriented towards like traditional Western canon. So Bach, and, you have to do 4-part chorales and, voice leading and all these principles, which are important, but which I understood more intuitively through my hands and through my ears. And later on through my college education was more being sort of imprinted on me through these classical forms, which is helpful. I actually think that like learning structure of harmony and melody is great. And it like did something to me creatively that like shut me down, which was really interesting. So then there was this whole unlearning and undoing process. And so that was like around 2007. I started at around that same time, YouTube kind of came into popularity. And so I started like finding, I guess you could say like unusual YouTube content around like a variety of different topics related to, Western philosophical traditions like alchemy. Alchemy is kind of this buzzword that we hear thrown around a lot, especially in music circles. But, there's like a really rich Hermetic tradition in Europe that, was intimately connected to the origins of Western music. So, I just became really interested in this part of history that usually isn't taught in university programs, at least not in the early stages of the bachelor program. So I did a lot of independent research. There's a professor out of New York named Jocelyn Godwin, and he's like a he speaks many different languages and has translated all of these important philosophical texts about, astronomers and like their belief about like how music and astronomy were connected. And so I started kind of like formulating my own ideas around how those were connected to my own personal experience as a songwriter and as a musician. And so as that stuff is like cooking and I'm like taking notes, I come across this one tiny idea, which was that Johann Sebastian Bach in the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is kind of like, the Bible of the Western canon, he had used this thing called the Bach motif, which was a musical signature. So basically, maybe you know this actually because you're in Norway, but in Germany, they actually have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
Yeah, we have the same.
And H is what we call B, and B is B flat. Okay, yeah. So B A C H actually spelled out what we would call like B A C B, if I'm not mistaken. And so that 4-note chromatic motif is actually, you could think of it as like a watermark on a bill. Like it's not visible until you hold it up to the light and you can kind of see like invisible ink, So basically the musicologists who would study the Well-Tempered Clavier noticed this motif woven into pieces within those published works, and there were other clues that he had left throughout his life that indicated that was an important motif. And so when I read about that, and then I discovered actually there had been, centuries after that, this whole tradition of musical cryptograms used by composers where they would embed their name into melodies. I just thought, wow, like what a weird thing, like what, it's like, I've never heard of that. And then, other sort of like signals started popping up for me. Like there's a post-rock band from the late 90s called Hazel. They were on Sub Pop, I think. I could be wrong about that, but they were like you think about Nirvana, it's kind of like a Nirvana era style band, you could say. And they had this song called Comet, where the chorus was, "And everywhere comets flare." And in the music video, people were sign languaging AECF. And there was literally like an ad lib in the background. The guy goes AECF, which is the first letter of each word in that chorus, "And everywhere comets flare." And I could hear these like 4 power chords under it. And I go, there's no way they're playing AECF power chords. Like that would just be too perfect. And I listened and they were. And I realized, oh, musical cryptograms are even being used by rock artists in the 90s. So then I started thinking like, is this like a whole hidden subtext to music that I've totally overlooked? I thought about, John Williams and the Close Encounters of the Third Kind with, Spielberg's famous movie about the UFO communicating with humans and that 5-note melody. And I just was so curious, it like really, it struck something in my imagination that connected into my love of music theory and my desire to like combine the early stages of imagination and creativity from being in a band and being like kind of a solo singer-songwriter with this like new part of me that had been installed from my university education, which was like, just conventional 4-part chorale writing and music theory. And so that's really, what got me into that. And I found out about ciphers. I found out that there were spies and people involved in espionage, like as early as the 17th and 18th centuries, who were using musical sequences to send secret messages to one another. And so essentially like what would appear to just be sheet music actually had like a decoder. And there's many different instances of this over time that are like recorded in encyclopedias. And so I realized, oh, it's not just for composing music, but like, secret messages, which, to evade detection in order to like communicate something like that felt also like it had this sort of like interest for me. It was like, messages encoded in melodies for music, but also messages encoded in melodies for just communications. So all this stuff, then it started tying into my understanding of encryption, because really encryption is the whole basis of internet protocol. I mean, and obviously like you think about crypto is, the basis of that is something called cypherpunk. Cypherpunk was like a movement that predates Bitcoin, where it was essentially people saying, yeah, we need a trustless system that we can build a new currency off of, because fiat currency and the global economy is like tied into all these power structures, yada, yada. So I was just like, man, it's like everything around like codes and, music and all this stuff is so fascinating to me. And then I started noticing in movies, like movies and video games. Like I remembered back to all these things that I had loved, like the Ocarina of Time is a famous Zelda game. And like, you play this melody on a flute and it has some magical effect on reality. It changes night to day or it causes the wind to move in a different direction. I think of Batman Returns playing a three-note melody on his piano and the Bat Cave opens up. He walks through his library door down into the Bat Cave. I mean, just dozens of examples of this from famous movies. And so what emerged for me was like this greater gestalt, this holistic view of music as a language, not just in the emotional sense and in the interpersonal sort of human to human connection sense, but literally as like a medium through which like a second layer of meaning, like an entire other world of like language could be encoded into melodies and chord progressions. So in 2014, I published my first book, which was called Astro Music, which was like really, I mean, kind of a punk DIY approach to writing about this stuff. I had, no publisher. That's not true. It was published by a company called Sync Book Press, which was, a legitimate publisher. But I didn't, at the time when I wrote it, I didn't get like an advance. So I was just working a full-time job at a bakery, like typing out every day, in my free time, all my ideas and trying to synthesize this stuff. Eventually I published a second book with them called Audiomancy. And so the whole premise of these books was like music has this fascinating sort of subcurrent of linguistic meaning that like nobody is even talking about or even aware of. And so after publishing those books, I did like I drove up and down the West Coast of the US and was going from bookstore to bookstore selling my books. And so I had this sort of like entrepreneurial moment where I had to kind of like, get people to buy in. And eventually I was speaking at, book conferences in Portland and up in Seattle. The biggest book conference I had was for about 700 or 800 people in Seattle. And I did like a book signing after, and then I was given a book deal offer by Wiser, which is like a big sort of like new age esoteric book publishing company. And I just thought, this feels like if I go down the route of like being an author and writing books, I'm going to be trapped in like this print medium. And I could just kind of see the writing on the wall that like that wasn't a career where I'd really be able to like make the kind of living that I wanted. And yeah, and I didn't have like a real career. I mean, I was still just working these like close to minimum wage like restaurant jobs, and playing in like bands and writing music on the side. But like, I just didn't feel like I'd figured it out yet. Around that time in like 2016, I met some digital nomads in Thailand. Actually, I took the little savings I had left and flew out to an island in the south of Thailand. And I was just living in this literally like a bamboo bungalow for like $3 a night. And but there was an internet cafe thing next door. And so I'd walk there every day, and I met these guys who had these Amazon drop shipping companies who were making like $30,000 a month. And I just couldn't believe that you could make money off the internet like that. It just blew my mind, And I met this one guy who was he was from London. He was like a UK based DJ who had bought this mailing list through like a friend of his who also did music stuff. And he was just creating these like new age like meditations, but there would be like a 1 hour meditation thing and he'd sell it for like $89.99 or something. And I was like, how are you, like, who's buying this? And he goes, oh no, he goes, I put all this love and intention into it. And I have a really, I spent all this time with my readers. And so I was like, wow, like that's a crazy thing. And he goes, we should try to sell your books as PDFs. And we did that. And we actually made some money. It was my first aha moment of like, oh, like I can sell my knowledge through my written work through like mailing lists. But I didn't have a mailing list and I couldn't buy his. So I kind of had this like brief moment of awareness followed by like 7 years of not doing that. Basically what happens after Thailand, I went back to the States. The little money I had left, I invested in going to code school. I took a 6-month boot camp for programming. I learned to code. And then I took about a year basically applying for jobs. And I got a job at a software company in Portland where I worked for 5 years. And it was a small startup doing appointment scheduling. And I wore all the hats. I mean, I did everything you can do at a startup. And, we went from about 300K in annual revenue to about 1.2 million. So we pretty much 4x the revenue with just me and the founder and one other guy. And so that was, again, like another huge learning moment for me of like, oh, my communication skills and my writing can like earn me a serious salary at a software company. It's not music, but it's that. So in 2020, then I got COVID hit, and my partner at the time was a designer, and we just had this thought one day. We're like, man, we're so bored, and like everything's shut down. Let's start a company. Why not? And so we started AudioCipher, and it was essentially my attempt to take all the stuff that I knew about and just make it like a tool, like a discrete tool that anybody could use that would turn words into melodies. So V1 was words to melody, V2 was words to melodies and chords with some rhythm. V3 was like, or no, I'm sorry, V2 was melody with more rhythm and more scales. V3 had chords. V4, which is the latest version that came out in September 2024, has chords and melodies and all sorts of randomization and inversions and voice leading and note joining, and really the most advanced algorithm that we could develop. But it also has something called the MIDI Vault, which is a MIDI file management tool. So essentially you can save any cryptogram that you create, any chord progression or melody you create, in a kind of card with metadata, which has like BPM, key signature, instrument type, mood, genre, rating, card name, notes, etc. So it's like everything you might want to have. And then, you can filter through all of that data in the MIDI Vault. And the main inspiration there was that you have these MIDI files and audio files that can be stored in one container, which means that if you have, a MIDI idea and you apply sound design and you bounce those audio tracks and import them into the Vault, then you can have, the samples in maybe a few different styles, and you can have the original blueprint in the MIDI. So next time when you open up a DAW project, you're like, I'm in this mood today, or I want to write for this genre, you go through your collection and you can actually just pinpoint what you want. And you've got the MIDI files if you want to add different sound design, or you've got the samples if you want to preview what it should sound like. Also, you can export your collections and you can import them. So there's a trading component here, which is a bit like trading cards with your friends. So let's say you and I were working on a music project. I'm like, Steiner, I've got like these 12, new ideas. Let's make a song together. I just send you the AudioCipher zip. You can import that AUCI file, and it just loads automatically with all the metadata and the audio files exactly as it was on my computer. And so it's a collaboration tool. And so I feel like that kind of gets you up to speed, but that's where I am today. And, what you're saying, I think the way we met on LinkedIn is that I'm also acting in the capacity as a music marketer. And that's because, over the last 2 years, as I was scaling up the company, my primary growth engine was organic. In other words, my blog articles were driving 50 to 60,000 unique site visitors a month, just again, like through my writing, and some percentage of those people then go check out our homepage, and some percentage of them buy. And so it was enough to kind of, keep our company running. And when I took that to other companies and showed them what I had done, they were like, can you recreate that for us, essentially, which I did. So I've worked with a number of AI music companies, Neuralframes, Suno AI is a big name a lot of people will recognize. I've worked with RipX, I've worked with Hook Theory, one you mentioned. I mean, probably a couple dozen at this point. I still have a few clients that I'm working with right now. And maybe this is, I'd love to open the space for you if you have any thoughts or questions on this stuff. But the thing that maybe connects in with you, and I know you're working in education, is one of my clients, they're called Future Proof Music School. They've just recently launched, but they actually have a AI chatbot that can listen. So it's actually able to analyze sound down to the mix and make like expert recommendations on how to improve your mix. And so, something I left out was I worked for 2 Ableton certified schools, one in San Francisco called Pyramid, and a second one called Champion Sound, where I worked combined about like probably 2.5, 3 years. And I would do these classes like either one-on-one mentorship, or I would do groups of like 6 people at a time. So I really have an intimate relationship with like teaching. Both of my parents were university professors, by the way, at different phases of their career. And so, I feel like my mission in life is, to create something that's inspiring and beautiful, to, build product, to make music, but also to teach and to make sure to remove the barriers to discovery that I feel like some of the industry gatekeepers can kind of throw up. And so, what I'm doing with my clients essentially is helping them to tell their story, find their position in the market, make sure that they're creating content that people will understand and that's helpful and makes it easy to understand how to use the product. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at currently today.
No wonder you're a good writer, because not many people I know can keep a flow of a story going for so long and so concise and clear as you just did. And it was really fascinating to just sit here and listen.
I appreciate that.
So basically, you've been through this whole process of connecting different interests. It was really fascinating when you started talking about cryptography and Bach, and you unloaded a lot of information that was completely new to me right there, which was fascinating. So as I understood it, you were saying that Bach interweaved his name in the music, as simple as just the notes B, A, C, and H. So that's B flat, A, and C, and then B in English, basically. So that's kind of a way that a musician could put his signature in the music. As a visual artist would sign his picture, he could just sign it with his initials. That's fascinating. And that kind of sparked another level of creativity for you.
Yeah, there was well, one thing I want to say for you is that, obviously you run out of H, what do you do? So what the French and European system is, I think that it was called the French and English cipher, which it's more than 100 years old now, but it basically, when you get to G, the H starts back at A again. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T. So you can kind of imagine how that goes. And so you end up with just a simple 7-column matrix. And that is the foundation of AudioCipher. That sort of historic thing. And, so musical cryptograms are very different from what most people think of with text to music. We think about description parity and, oh, well, I typed in a lo-fi hip hop beat with XYZ instruments and that's not what I'm getting back. Well, yeah, that's not the intended use of it, So it's one of the things that's interesting about AudioCipher is it really disrupts the trance that we're all in, that like text turns into the thing by way of AI taking control and doing everything for you. The vision with AudioCipher, in which I've done like dozens of demo of this on our site that anybody could check out, is to take a word like frog and then apply sound design that sounds froggy and have some croaking sound effects and create the atmosphere and the mood of a toad. And what does frog synth sound like? Right. So it's actually, AudioCipher is not about handing over creative agency to AI. It's about harnessing this thing that's implicitly interesting to us as creators, which is turning text into music, but retaining all of the creative control, except for one little constraint, which is that the letters of each word are encoded into that melody or chord progression, which means you never would have arrived at that specific sequence had you not used that word. And so in a way, the word is forever connected to that piece of music, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll talk more about AI and music after a while. I find it also interesting that a common theme in the AI music space is that a possible negative consequence of using AI to generate music is that you kind of lose the struggle. And the struggle to make art is sometimes depicted as the art itself. So the struggle is the art. And through AudioCipher, you still get that struggle. It's more like a confinement that lets you be creative inside the confinements of that cryptogram or that overarching concept, which a frog might be. I teach composition at the university, and one year I gave my students a really weird assignment where I just told them to meet up at 9 at this particular spot, and I didn't really say anything other than that, and then they met up. I arrived and I took a water bottle and I just poured the contents of the water bottle on the ground. And then I said, okay, now we have what you need. Make some music. So that's a bit similar to the frog experiment, I guess. So it makes me wonder if I could do some sort of composition or arrangement assignments, including AudioCipher. I think that would be fun.
Absolutely.
Before we move on, could you tell us some examples how people use AudioCipher?
Sure. Yeah, well, we talked about the frog example. I mean, there's a few use cases that I think appeal to people. So, one of them you've seen maybe, for example, Suno is like a really popular AI music tool. And one of the things that they really led with was like create music for your grandma and grandpa, or for your girlfriend or boyfriend, or for your pet, you know? And so I think the idea of devotional music sounds like really heavy and kind of like spiritual or religious. But I think devotional music really is about like, I made this music for you. And like, there's something really powerful about that. So I think one of the coolest ways to use AudioCipher is to make music for something you like or something you love. And that could be anything. It could be a person or a place or a thing. It could be a slice of pizza. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, you know. But I think that, to me, that's my favorite use case for it. So, and then also, there's the MIDI file management piece of it, which we aren't focusing on as much, but that's a huge thing, which is sample management. I mean, people have all these DAW project files that are just like some random sketch that they just saved and they never go back to. And there's hundreds of memes on Instagram. I mean, I started liking these memes that joke about this issue, and I realized it's just an endless joke because we all have these like poorly named files. And if you want to search through it, it's like the file name is like whatever random thing dash the BPM dash the key dash the instrument dash the genre. It's like, why are we still doing this in 2025? So our card system was intended to solve that problem, but also connecting MIDI to audio. That was like the really the most innovative thing we did. There's other sample managers out there. Some of them have more traditional kind of views, but I think the way that we went about it by combining that tool with the text to MIDI generator, it just wound up being kind of a unique, combination. And the bridge between the two of them is a save button. So basically you can save any text to MIDI creation you generate and put that right into a card.
Yeah, nice. And I'll put a link to AudioCipher in the article about this episode so people can check it out.
Cool.
So I found you through LinkedIn, and on LinkedIn you do a lot of takes on AI and music, both on the skeptical side and also on the optimistic side. So I thought we might explore both sides of the argument. So let's start on the negative side. What examples of generative AI in music genuinely provoke or frustrate you these days?
I find myself in this like unfortunate position of being like the grumpy guy in the middle of town square ringing the bell going like, this doesn't work, this isn't good enough, and I don't take pleasure from that, actually, because I like having good connections and relationships with the people in my industry. The thing that frustrates me the most is hype that is disconnected from product. And so at the end of the day, I've committed myself, for better or for worse, probably at my own detriment, but I think for the benefit of the greater software and professional community, hopefully, to writing honest reviews about my actual experience with product. So, and beyond just my frustration with hype, I would say, people are rushing to get stuff to market as fast as possible, move fast and break things, as we say in tech. And that's resulted in some crazy bugs. I mean, the worst one, I'm not going to throw them under the bus and name the company, but there was one company I was quite excited to use their AI plugin. And there was a critical bug that actually ran a system override on my speakers and blew out my right headphone. And I had tinnitus for like 3 days. And I DM'd the founder and was like, hey, like, what the heck? And he was like, oh, sorry about that. Like, we just urgently fixed the bug. Would you like to try it again? I was like, no, you guys need to QA your stuff, So yeah, I think like a lack of quality assurance and like rigorous testing, it's just like, it's actually the case in a lot of, smaller product. I mean, the unfortunate reality, and I say this as an insider, as a software founder myself, who's also worked, like I said, with dozens of other companies and CEOs there, is that there's just not a lot of money in the space. I mean, companies are working on lean budgets compared to other industries, like enterprise B2B industries where there's just millions of dollars to work with. I mean, there are exceptions, Suno, Udio, Refusion, companies that get, either a few $1 million or in Suno's case, $125 million of VC to play with. But like the majority of us, I mean, I can speak as AudioCipher, and we're a totally bootstrapped company. We're not making that much money per month. And so there's not that much budget. I mean, I'm still have not turned a profit for myself after 5 years. And we've done over 6 figures in revenue. But the cost of a good designer and a good developer and paying for marketing and paying for everything, I mean, it all comes out of pocket. So I have a certain compassion for these founders who are shipping product as fast as possible. It's not that I intend to like put them in a bad situation by calling out when the product's not functioning as it's hyped up to. But at the same time, if there's no accountability, then there's no real transparency in what happens. We've seen this not just in music, by the way, it happens in all the different AI news stories. Is like one person claims that something is the case, and then people just repeat that ad infinitum, and nobody takes the 30 minutes of due diligence to just check and see if that's even true. And so that's the thing that frustrates me the most. This stuff that most people complain about with AI music and AI audio is like the disruption, the unfairness to artists, like all this stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm with you on all that, but like to me, I just live and breathe this topic. So like, I've come to a certain point where I'm like, I accept that that's like part of this transformative experience we're having as a global civilization. AI is extremely disruptive. And, I don't see that many paths for us. One of us is to bury our heads in the sand. Another one is to scream from the rooftops. And, another one is to just blindly hype and promote. I mean, there's these sort of like lanes that we're all kind of jettisoned into. And I just feel like, well, the best thing, like the healthiest thing that we can do is to use the product and understand it and criticize it. Not just criticize it on an ethical and moral high ground, but to criticize where it's not functioning properly. If this stuff is supposed to be an assistant for humans and not just take over our jobs, we have to become intimately familiar with it. Know thine enemy, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I find that you do a great service in doing honest reviews, because that's kind of lacking in the space, I think. I try to follow along with what's new each week or each month in regards to plugins or new software. And I would say like 99% of what's being hyped doesn't function as advertised, or it's simply low quality sound or low quality interface, or so it's really helpful to have someone doing honest reviews. And I guess the plugins or companies themselves also will be appreciative of such a reviewer when they finally have a product that is good, because then you have a reliable source of marketing, I guess you could say.
Totally.
I've also read a post from you a few weeks or months ago, I think, where you noticed generative music being played in cafes and restaurants. And that's something that's a bit provocative to me, at least, as a musician. How did you notice that it was generative AI music? And what do you think is the motivation for restaurants to use it?
I just want to say, I think that I have subconsciously like repressed my awareness of that. This feeling of rage like came back up as you were saying that, not towards you, of course, but like towards this thing, because aside from like being a product snob or whatever anybody wants to think about me as, like the thing that makes me the most angry is like generative AI songs in public spaces. It's like a sonic infection. It's like a total intrusion. It's basically how I discovered it was happening was it's obvious, because you can tell the difference. It's like, and then the second thing was I started using Shazam every time it would happen. And one of two things would happen. Either it doesn't show up, and if it does show up, it's like the artist name, the album name, and the publisher were all the same title, and it'd be some random thing, and then there'd be some AI artwork, and you just realize like, what's going on? So I started going up to the baristas at the cafes and the cashier at the front of the hotel lobby. I mean, this has happened in 3 hotels, 5 cafes, 3 or 4 restaurants now. I mean, like almost a dozen experience of this. And every time when I go up, I'm like, hey, just out of curiosity, like, where's this music coming from? And they're like, oh, let me check. And they're like, they show me their phone, and it's just every time it's a YouTube playlist, and it'll be like chill lo-fi cafe beats or whatever. And it's just a 14-hour playlist.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what's happening is some black hat SEO marketing type people realize that they can put out these long form playlists which solve a business problem. Think about the problem it solves for businesses. First of all, if you're a cafe, you're like, and you're, by the way, if you're a cafe in a place like Thailand or Vietnam where, you know, they don't want to be playing traditional Vietnamese or Thai music because they're supposed to be hipster. And so who's defining like what a hipster cafe is like? Well, the West and Europe in a way. I mean, obviously they have their own amazing drinks and styles and in many ways aesthetically, but like musically, they go for all the same stuff that, you know, you kind of get from like your run of the mill, like cafe in Portland, Oregon, you know, which is like, oh, it's like lo-fi, it's chill lo-fi beats or something like that. Right. And so they're just kind of emulating that, but they don't necessarily come in the same way. Like having worked in cafes, like there's a certain pride you take of like getting to take control over the auxiliary cord and like plug into your own, you know, collection of music that you've curated. It's like the one perk of working at a cafe is you get to put on your own playlist. And so maybe there's that part of it that bothers me, of like the cultural degradation of the cafes being like that third place that's not work or not home that you can go to, and which should be like a place where culture, I mean, traditionally, right? Like cafes are where you exchange ideas and like, or you work independently, but you hear something really stimulating that like you Shazam, and it's like, oh, I've never heard of this artist before. And it's like the barista, they look cool and they make great coffee and they've got great taste in music. Like that's the stereotype. And the great music is an important part of the experience economy, let's call it. So I just think that, like, for me, having, you know, listened to a lot of Suno and Udio music and generated a lot of it, it is that, first of all, you'll see one of my posts, if you go back a month or two, was about if somebody did a data cloud analysis of Suno and Udio. I think it was Suno specifically. And it was like the concentration of these keywords. And it was like whispers. It was like all these like whispers, heart, like it was like 150 words. And I'm like, those are all the words. Like those are the words you hear that are dead giveaways. The second is like this kind of, it's like not quite auto-tuned in like the cool, like R&B trap sense, but it's auto-tuned like it's like if somebody played a vocal melody on a synthesizer, and then like also the arpeggiation of like a piano or a guitar part, it'll be like really clean, like too clean. It's all these things combined. You just hear it and you instantly know it. The same way you're like, how do you know that's a Beatles song? It's like, I don't know, because it's clearly Lennon and McCartney. It's their songwriting, it's their instrumentation, it's George Martin, it's them, you know? Yeah. Anyway, so between Shazam, looking at the YouTube, it's like piecing it all together. And my girlfriend, by the way, she can recognize it. And she's not even a musician. But we walked into a place and she looked at me and she's like, Suno, right? And I was like, yeah. So I don't think this is like, oh, well, he's just, you know, a trained musician. I don't think that's it. I think what it is that in Asia, they don't even have the conception of Suno and generative AI music, because they're, you know, these are baristas and they're not, you know, Thailand and Vietnam, it's not necessarily third world countries, especially in the cities where like this is happening. We're talking about in Dalat, in Da Nang, in Ho Chi Minh, in Bangkok, in Chiang Mai. You know, these are like the tourist hubs of these places, especially for Westerners. But I don't think that the average barista there knows like that what AI music sounds like. And so they just don't even realize when they're putting these playlists on, like what's happening. My second, more conspiratorial view with the hotels, this could be wrong too. Maybe this is a stretch, but I just also wonder if they're ducking like performing rights organization fees, like PROs, because, you know, when you make a certain threshold of money in the States, at least, you can get audited. And like, there's a huge fine if you're caught playing music you haven't licensed, which means that people pay to license music. I have a quick anecdote for this, but like when I was a teenager, I used to work at an ice cream store called Cold Stone Creamery. Do they have that in Norway?
No.
Oh, it's so cold there. You guys probably don't even eat ice cream. So Cold Stone is like a McDonald's for ice cream, you could think of. And we had a box. We had a physical box that was mounted on the wall with like 14 song playlist, and had like Paul McCartney, silly love songs. They had like these like hit songs, you know, and it would play the same 14 tracks every day all year round, except for like Christmas and this, and then they'd have like the Christmas period and whatever. But they licensed these songs probably for unlimited use across all franchises. And so like as an employee, you have to just suffer the pain of the 14 same songs your entire time you work at that company, right? But that's how I realized like this is how PROs work, is they like squeeze companies and are like, you need to pay us all this money. So, but if you're a hotel, you're, you know, in Asia, you either are like, well, we don't respect intellectual property anyway, so we'll play whatever we want. In which case, then they're just, you know, they're streaming music because why not? Because it's the same reason the cafe is. Or what happened to me was I stayed at one hotel and then I went across the street and stayed at the other hotel, and they were both playing Suno tracks around the clock in the lobby, around the clock. Same type too, like just like pop, Suno pop music. I used to work for Suno. This isn't just rallying against Suno because people love to hate on them, but it's about music that the lyrics were generated by ChatGPT. The music was clearly just like a simple prompt that they just generated 1,000 iterations of, dumped into a YouTube file and uploaded. It is a low effort, low return kind of equation. And for that to then find its way into public spaces, I think is actually really, I would even say dangerous. I think it's dangerous for human culture long term.
Yeah. I've actually heard of instances of this in Norway as well, because as you mentioned, in Thailand, they might not even be aware of what's the genuine, authentic music as compared to the AI generated ones. But I heard of this at a cafe in Norway as well, where a Norwegian jazz saxophonist was eating, and he was just noticing this awful generic jazz music playing there. And in Norway, cafes pay kind of this blank slate rights payment either way, so they don't have a financial incentive to use generated music because they have to pay the rights organization anyway. But this saxophonist then asked the cafe owner, "What's this music?" And then, similar to what you were saying, the cafe owner showed a list of like 14-hour non-stop generic jazz music. And he was like, "Why are you playing this and not genuine music?" And because of the cafe owner probably doesn't even recognize the difference, but the guests do. And the reason the cafe owner had for using that playlist was simply because it was very long, non-stop, no non-commercial break music. So basically just logistics. It was a bit simpler.
Convenience.
Yeah. Convenience, yeah, that's the right word.
Totally.
So, yeah, that's definitely something to combat, I think, to not dilute human culture and quality.
Totally agree with you on that.
You did mention it briefly, actually, in your last statement regarding Suno using ChatGPT for lyrics, and that was kind of one telltale sign of generative music, that you could hear these kind of buzzwords that often gets repeated in Suno, which brings me to another question. Why does Suno's lyrics suck?
Yeah, well, ChatGPT's lyrics suck.
Yeah.
And why would Suno use ChatGPT? Because, and this is pure inference, by the way. I mean, I have no idea. I mean, I actually haven't even heard Suno or UDO officially come out and say that they use ChatGPT. It's just been inferred, not just by me, but by many others online as well. It's pretty clear that that's what's happening, especially because if you type in like a prompt on ChatGPT and then you put the same thing into Suno and UDO, you get the same cliches across all three. Like you can see it clearly if you do the experiments. I think, this is just my pet theory, that they're passing on Well, okay, let me back up for a second. Are you familiar with when Anthropic, I believe I hope I'm getting this right, but I think it was Anthropic got in trouble because Claude had recreated certain copywritten lyrics in their outputs.
Right. Yeah, I've heard about it.
So basically, what happened? Man, I wish I'm pretty sure this is correct. That it was UMG who went after Anthropic and was suing them. And basically, the courts were like, well, their takeaway was that Anthropic needed to do a better job policing their outputs and essentially gatekeeping to make sure that copyright material didn't come out of it. UMG was like, we don't even want them training on our stuff. And basically, like, the courts aren't ready to do that. I think there's a whole like meta narrative here around like the legal system and like why all these generative AI companies are basically getting off scotch-free. And I think it has to do with geopolitical, technological arms races with China. And, there's like bigger stuff happening than just like artist livelihoods. It has to do with technology. But to get back to the point, like the reason that I think Suno and Udio and probably Refusion are all using ChatGPT is they can pass the buck on to OpenAI. I mean, basically, OpenAI is taking all the heat. Now, if they had trained on something like, I always thought, why not train on Genius? Do you know the website Genius?
Yeah.
It's a lyric database, right? And it has like on every lyric, on every stanza, the user generated comments on what they believe that lyric means. It's like a Wikipedia for lyrics, right? So why not scrape all that the same way they scraped everything else? I mean, it's clearly not a moral dilemma for them. Why not scrape that and then take all the metadata about the meaning of those lyrics and then the genre of music that it belongs to. And when somebody says like create a trap song with trap lyrics, why not use the language, the lexicon of that genre? Why not? I mean, not only do you have the lyrics, but you actually know like what all the double entendres and the slang means. It's all there in Genius. So why not do that? Well, I think because if they were to do that, first of all, they could get sued by a fellow tech company. I mean, remember, like they're an A16Z company, I believe, Genius, one of the earlier ones. It's like these VC tech companies, the investors are probably buddies. So they would rather pass the buck to OpenAI. Again, this is just my theory, and not have to deal with stepping on the toes of a sort of cousin organization, let's call it. I think that's why the lyrics suck.
Yeah. So if there was any copyright issues with the lyrics in Udio or Suno, they could just say that it wasn't us, it was ChatGPT, so they have to take the fall for it.
I think so.
Yeah. And it totally makes sense because, as you say, why not why not scrape the data from Genius? That would obviously be a lot better than what we're currently using. Okay. So let's take a slight pivot here. I know that you have done some educating using hook theory and doing music theory lessons for music producers, more for producers maybe than the musicians. So you have some experience there in using technology for kind of music technologists. As you were saying, AI is a huge disruption for society as a whole, and probably will be in education as well. And I'm wondering if you have any take on if music education needs to change to adapt to AI, and if so, how?
And that's such a good question. Yeah, I think there's like a few layers to this because first of all, the industry is changing, which means career paths are changing, which means career preparedness isn't the same thing that it was 10 years ago, right? So right today, the generative tools and the machine learning tools that we have, they may not truly be competitive, but like how long until they are? I don't know. And what do any job markets look like when AI becomes like the standard hiring procedure? Like if an AI can do it, it's cheaper to do that than hire a human, right? So what does the industry look like? So when you're talking about music education, there's the layer of like music theory, music production, like this traditional skill set. You could say, well, that's going to be disrupted because instead of writing a melody from scratch, you're going to be procuring melodies from a generative system and assembling them together like a Frankenstein, right? Like a sample-based producer, really. But instead of licensing samples and downloading sample packs, you're going to be prompting and generating and fine-tuning. And, if we talk about specific tools, there's like, SampLab and RipX, which are audio to MIDI transcription tools. So you could generate something in Suno or UDO or Refusion, stem separate it, grab the particular track, throw it into RipX or SampLab, manipulate the individual notes, pass it through a plugin like Soothe 2, which is able to kind of take some of the high ends off so it's not so scratchy. And all of a sudden, okay, you've actually got a decent sounding thing. And run it through Lander has an AI music plugin suite. So, okay, run it through that for mastering. And, there's like all these different sort of. My friend Dime Dougal, he's a composer, production music composer, and he calls it like a modular AI stack. And I think that's like a really great way to think about it. Like the same way if you were in Ableton and Max and you're creating like a modular arrangement for effects, like a effect chains or something. You can imagine in a similar way doing that with AI tools where it's like I generate it, I stem separate, I clean it up, I do note manipulation, I do automatic EQing. Maybe even there's some other interesting stuff that hasn't surfaced yet. I have some ideas of what that could be. And then there's a mastering stage. And it's like, that's a very different thing from what music composition was 50 years ago, where it's a guy or a girl with their guitar or piano and, imagining a whole symphony. So now look at what the average community college in America is teaching is still like Bach chorales from the 1750s or 1740s or whatever. It's like, hello. It's so far off base from where things are at. And I get that like we need to teach music education, but I think that part of the way music education has to adapt is to like square up with the reality of the world we live in today. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be training skilled instrumentalists or composers who understand complex theory and harmonic analysis and can really do that stuff manually. Because I do think the role of humans in relationship to AI will be a curator, an arranger, maybe a little bit of production, but also there will be a need for fine tuning and thinking about sonic brand. So it'll be more about your imagination and your storytelling capacity as a musician, and less about your physical capabilities. I think that's the biggest disruption we're going to see on the musician, composer, producer side. But when you talk about the industry, you talk about music supervisors, like roles like that, like sync music licensing. Like the majority of musicians are not making money, at least like they're not the, serious money off of revenue from Spotify streams and Apple Music. Maybe if you're lucky, you're making a few $1,000s a month, if you're very lucky, My band does 30,000 monthly listeners, and we do like $200 a month. So I don't know the fraction, 0.0002% per stream, and based on how long you listen, it's crazy. So the money is in licensing, it's in sync licensing. That's like, or if you're really fortunate, you get brought onto a team for a video game. These were like custom composing for a score. But that's the extreme minority. Most musicians are not even aiming for that, for film music and video games. So I think that a lot of that stuff is going to be generative. And I think, education needs to prepare people mentally for the actual industry that's incoming. And that means being equipped to use the tools, which is why I do what I do, and which is why I don't like the hype machine, because I think the hype machine gets in the way of actual industry awareness. If we're all just hyping each other's stuff because it has the word AI in front of it, and we're resharing it and we're not even taking a moment to understand it, then how can we educate ourselves and how can we educate others if we're teachers, when we don't even understand the tools? So, I think it's great that you're actually testing them. It sounds like yourself, and you're having the same experience I am, which is like, wow, the proposition, the value proposition of the app versus what it actually does, there's still like this gap. Music is the worst one. I mean, the video, AI video and AI image and AI text is like leagues beyond where music is right now. Suno and Udio were like, hey, just so you guys know, it could be way better. We we did something horrible, but at least you know that it could be better. Like until then, we had Boomy and Hubert and Ava and these like first what I call the first wave tools. People were like, oh well, I can't really do it because music is a spiritual human blah blah blah. It's like, sorry, music is a quantify. It's just like image and video and everything else. That doesn't mean that the human spirit doesn't matter. It's incredibly important. It's the reason that when we listen to an AI generated Suno song in a cafe, it's disgusting. It's disgusting because artists weren't compensated, the music wasn't licensed. It's disgusting aesthetically because it is not creative, and it's disappointing that that there's no regulation, that the streaming platforms, even though we have tools like IRCAM Amplify, which is I think one of the best like AI content detection tools that I've tested. I've tried a couple other ones, PEX, and there's the other one's escaping me right now, but there's a few of them out there, and they get it to a certain degree of accuracy, but I think the problem is they can't do 100% accuracy with content detection because the algorithms, the generative algorithms change so often. And so, anyway, music education is going to have to account for, artists' livelihoods, copyright, the redefinition of copyright law, what it means to make music composing as a profession, all this stuff. And, I'll close with this. I'll say, one of my clients, Future Proof Music School, they're actually former head of education from Icon Collective. John Von Seeger and a couple of people from that team have branched off, and they've created, they have human mentors, human created courses, but they have AI that asks you questions and learns where your knowledge gaps are and creates a custom curriculum around that. And they have an AI chatbot that you can upload music tracks to, and you can get real feedback while you're in the DAW. It's actually voice activated. So as I'm speaking to Cadence is the name of the bot, Cadence is like, oh, have you tried adjusting that parameter? I'm like, where is that on the interface? They're like, try looking in this there. I'm like, oh, I don't see it there. And they're like, oh, what about this? And so it's as if you have a mentor like speaking to you in real time, but it's available 24/7. And so for me, I found that's like the most profound AI music education tool I've personally used, because like it was just in real time giving me the kind of support I usually have to pay like a premium for. And yet there's certain things it doesn't understand, it can't see, and it can only hear with a certain amount of intelligence. Like there's limits to what it does and doesn't understand. So that's where then you can level up and get that high touch mentorship call like a couple times a month if you need it. And there's a Discord community. And so it's like you have your peers and your teachers and your AI all together in one spot. I think that's the future of music education, is like these AI augmented curriculums.
That sounds cool. I have to try that out, I think. The school I work at is kind of known for electronic music. And by the way, I don't work for the classical department. So I work for what's in Norway called the rhythmical department, which is internationally known as popular music. And so because of this institute's devotion to, I guess you could say, modern music interpretation, that's why we've been awarded with this Center of Excellence, as it's called, where we work on the creative use of technologies in music education. And when I discuss with other faculty members, particularly the ones doing electronic music, the things we tend to focus on are risk-taking and collaboration. So that's kind of some directions that are kind of, or at least hopefully, will be relevant no matter what kind of technology comes, because in some way this AI wave is kind of the end tail of a long development of MIDI and synthesizers and drum machines, and there's been a lot of stuff that had the potential of automating musicians' tasks, but we haven't been fully automated yet, and I suspect we will never be. unless we reach kind of this Westworld or Matrix kind of dystopian future.
We'll get there.
But yeah, we'll get there.
It's a matter of time.
No worries.
Can I ask you on the risk taking side of that? Can you expand on that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
So that could mean playing live, for instance, in contrast to just sitting at home producing stuff. And also there's a risk taking in involving other people in your project. And it could be a risk in terms of using plugins that you don't exactly know how it will behave, stuff like that.
Recordings, your foot splashing in a puddle of water that your teacher randomly poured on the floor.
Yeah, for instance.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think that those are like holistic, universal truths about music making, which is like the more risks you're willing to take, yeah, you may fail along the way, but the more likely you are to stumble on something interesting. And I think that like when you work within the constraints of something risky or unusual, there's this like higher probability of stumbling across something kind of cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of art in mistakes. I have this professor at the university who has this quote regarding mistakes and AI and language models, particularly concerning the Norwegian band a-ha. They had this huge hit called Take On Me. I don't know if you've heard that.
Take on me.
Yeah, Take On Me, Take Me On. And that it's not very linguistically correct, that song. So, I mean, they might never have made such a hit if they did have ChatGPT to correct their grammar. There's some beautiful stuff lying in the mistakes.
Totally.
So we're starting to get to a close here, Ezra. But I was wondering if you could say something about what excites you most right now when it comes to AI music tools.
Well, I'll tell you the dream tool that doesn't exist, and I wish that it did. How about that?
Okay, go for it.
Maybe somebody will see this and they'll be like, "I'm going to build that."
Yeah.
And then they can send me the beta and I'll trash it on LinkedIn. And then eventually it'll get better and better until I'm supporting them on LinkedIn.
Yeah, nice.
I would love to see a tool that can infer the timbre of a particular instrument from a track. So for example, like I would love to be able to say, give me the piano from this track. Like, and let me just play that on the MIDI keyboard. The amount of time that I spend as a composer trying to just get a sound that doesn't suck. Like think about like, and I know this would be horrible for like native instruments and like, all these companies where it's like, they just sell thousands and thousands of dollars of product that are like really high quality, like incredible, like all the different articulations of a piano from like, pianissimo all the way to forte. And you know what I mean? But it would be amazing to be able to get something like that where you can infer. There is actually a company called SampLab that I mentioned earlier that does audio to MIDI. I'm beta testing a tool right now for them called Reharmonizer. And it is kind of this idea, but it's like just a one shot. So it can analyze a one shot and it turns it into a wavetable. And it tries to recreate that. It's like a little bit noisy because it's a generative recreation and then it pitch shifts it. It does a pretty good job, but it's like, I haven't seen anything that really like does this yet. There's Synth GPT where you can type in some text and turn it into what you're going. But again, like it's doing that with a wavetable. The sounds are a little generic. Like these are all proofs of concept. We're in the proof of concept phase of AI music plugins in general. We just have to be okay with that and come to terms with it. Like none of these tools, I mean, even AudioCipher has so many problems. I mean, it's not buggy, but the problem I have with it is that I would like to be able to toggle over from text to MIDI, melody and chord generation based on cryptograms to, a tool that actually generates MIDI that feels like the words that I put in. If I say like the feeling of standing outside with your bare feet on a snowy day, and it just creates a composition that actually evokes that feeling. To do that, it also needs a sound design layer. So like, because MIDI on its own, like the sound design is everything actually. And it's not everything, but it's certainly like at least 50% of it. So my dream for AudioCipher would be to get like millions of dollars from a VC firm who just like, sees the vision and just build out like the actual product I have in mind, which is like turn your ideas into music, but not like finished audio samples, like content in your DAW that you have total control over, rather than what we have now, which is like stem separate a Suno track and then pitch shift the individual notes, and then it sounds all grainy and messed up. And it's like that's fine for now, but like ultimately I want to have tools for composers and musicians in the DAW. That's my dream.
Yeah, awesome. So thanks so much for joining, Ezra. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise, Stein. Really nice to meet you and talk to you about this stuff.